With Paper Mario TTYD being a more popular game with more discussion surrounding it, it's fair to imagine there'd be a lot of misinformation in circulation for this game. However, despite this, it was actually much harder to make this video than my Paper Mario 64 misconceptions video. Nonetheless, I hope you do learn something, and with that, let's get started. The first thing I want to touch on as far as misconceptions go is that when you're in the field, grounded spikes hurt Mario if you run up to their sides. This is a misconception that's more likely to occur if you play the original TTYD, because in that game it actually was the case, requiring good timing on the player's part to avoid getting skewered. In the remake, however, you can just run up to the spikes and not have to worry about taking damage from them. This completely removes the need to time when you start running across them, and works both in Chapter 5's Pirate's Grotto and Chapter 8's Palace of Shadow, which, speaking of which, you can avoid getting hurt in the spike maze entirely by either walking or equipping Slow Go. As for misconception number 2, you may have noticed when attacking with either Mega Rush or Mega Rush P that attacking a target while in peril sees an exclamation bubble appear above their heads. This exclamation mark has no impact on whether or not an enemy wakes up early after being put to sleep ahead of time. If you see it when attacking, all it means is that Mega Rush is working. This misconception more than likely exists because of the GameCube version, where if you do see an exclamation mark above an enemy's head while they're asleep, it typically means that the enemy has woken up early. These two things in truth are not actually linked. On to misconception number 3, you may be aware of these enemies that are called wizards. Or Wazirs, I don't actually know how to pronounce. When they're alone in battle and not invisible, you may have noticed that they'll use a move that makes illusions appear. This can happen for both Dark Wizards and Elite Wizards, but not the yellow wizards you'll find in the Pit of 100 Trials. If they're alone in battle, they'll keep attacking you the same way they've always been attacking you, which in some ways actually makes them more difficult to handle than Elite Wizards even, since the wizards that can create illusions can often be manipulated to keep doing it thanks to either Vivian's Burn or Mario's Fire Drive. Similarly, another enemy oddity and misconception number 4 is that Dark Puffs are immune to electricity. Dark Puffs are cloud enemies that are capable of electric attacks. Despite this, they're actually entirely vulnerable to electric damage, whether from Thunderbolts or Thunder Rages. Meanwhile, Rough Puffs are not only immune to electric damage, they actively heal off of it. And it's the same story as Ice Puffs with icy damage, though something I find very odd is that Poison Puffs are not immune to poison damage. Neither are Putrid Piranhas actually. Though on the note of poison enemies, if we're talking about Poison Puffs, it's here we get into misconception number 5. Whenever a puff enemy is charging energy that represents its element, it becomes entirely immune to direct damage. If you try to jump on a charging Dark Puff or Rough Puff and you're not electrified yourself, you will deal 0 damage to the enemy in question and take 1 point of damage in recoil. Meanwhile, if Ice Puffs are storing cold energy, you can't attack them directly at all, with the same recoil penalty applying that Dark Puffs and Rough Puffs have. However, for some reason, this isn't the case for Poison Puffs. If a Poison Puff is charging Poison Breath and you attack it directly, it will take full damage from your one hit against it, but the attacker will end up becoming poisoned themselves, and is dealt half the damage they've dealt to the Poison Puff in question. You'd think all Puff enemies would become immune to direct damage after they're charging energy, but for some reason in this game, the most powerful one is the only one that can actually be hurt if you were to make direct contact while unprotected. It's really weird. Speaking of stuff that's really weird, misconception number 6 is all about the charge status. When storing up extra attack to use on your next move, it's reasonable to think that charge would apply to your next attack no matter what it actually was, as long as it actually does damage, right? Well, as it turns out, charge doesn't work for Yoshi's Mini Egg. And by that I mean, it doesn't check for that move at all. If Yoshi is charging and then he uses Mini Egg, he will still retain his charge, which depending on how you use either the status or the move can actually make it very useful. But it's still really odd. And moreover, this oddity actually works in the opposite direction. There's actually a partner move that consumes charge even though it can't do damage at all in Flurry's Gale Force, which to my knowledge is the only partner move with this distinction, where it doesn't deal damage but also doesn't actually retain your charge status. Misconception number 7 though, this one shocked me. What the...
How did that hit them?
Yeah, somehow, despite the backdrop clearly not hitting the Hyper Paragoombas, it still did damage to them all the same. Speaking personally, I was under the assumption that because the enemies actually seem to get hit in order according to how high up their hitbox is, that the game would not let them take damage if they were out of range. It's an actual anomaly that the enemies still take damage despite the fact that they're clearly not getting hit here. I want to talk about Ice Smash for misconception number 8. Regarding finding potential uses for this badge, some may be tempted to try using this for Embers and other fiery type enemies, seeing value in the fact that Ice Smash does +1 damage to enemies that are weak to the element. However, this is just wishful thinking. Remember that Mario has had access to Power Smash since the beginning of Chapter 1, and opposed to Ice Smash's +1 damage against fiery enemies, Power Smash just does a flat +2 damage to everything it can hit, meaning the only reason you'd use Ice Smash is if you wanted to try and freeze them, which is not very likely considering that most fiery enemies are only 50-50 to being frozen. Weaknesses in general in TTYD really are just not worth concerning yourself with. They're more like a happy coincidence rather than something you'd use as a win condition, at least if the aim is to do damage. If it's for a status element, that can be a different story entirely. Case in point, misconception number 9, and this one involves the move Showstopper. It's a very common misconception that Showstopper is a useless special move, when the reality is that Showstopper is a very much prominent victim of bad game design. When you first find the move, you're surrounded by dark boos, and you may think, new move? Let's try it against the dark boos here. And you're likely to soon find out that Showstopper isn't actually very effective against the dark boos, where I say you'd be lucky to knock out even one of them. For some reason, the game developers actually put Showstopper in a room that is full of enemies that are highly resistant to it. Showstopper at max power here is only a 10% chance of actually working, and this can actually end up discouraging players from actually trying this move in later areas, which is a really big shame. Most enemies you'll find later in the game are actually highly weak to it, with 90 or 95% chances of getting one-hit knocked out, the only noteworthy exceptions being the Cross-Yux enemies and the remaining bosses. It's also highly effective against some of the most dangerous enemies in the Pit of 100 Trials, like Dark Craw and Dark Koopa Trolls, having a 95% success rate against both of them. It's really a crying shame that this move got screwed over as hard as it did, since in some areas, it's going to be much more efficient than a move like Art Attack or Earth Tremor. Now that we're at misconception number 10, there's a collection of badges I want to talk about. Those badges being the P up D downs and the P down D ups. You might think of these as shaper badges that allow you to increase the attack power of Mario or his partner, or the defense power of Mario or his partner. But they don't actually function quite like the Defend Plus or Power Plus badges do, and therein lies the misconception. As opposed to being either offense increasing or defense increasing badges, they're actually special modifiers. It's not true extra attack or true extra defense, and at least defensively is where this becomes significant. Conventional defense, like from the Defend Plus badges or Koops, can actually be bypassed by certain attacks, like Loomtail's Earthquake, Marilyn's Lightning, or Bowser's Fire Breath. But the P down D up badges, for example, they don't necessarily increase the defense of Mario or his partner, rather they decrease the damage from all incoming attacks, whether it's an enemy, an item, or a stage prop. So if ever you were wondering why you would equip both Power Plus and P down D up, as opposed to just Defend Plus and being done with it, now you know, as P down D up covers more attacks than just Defend Plus would. There's actually a lot more to these badges, but I can't really cover them all in this video, so instead I recommend you check out JD Acer's BattleBits series on Twitter. I'll link it in the description, so be sure to check it out. As always, thank you to my channel members, QuakeWave13, MB Switchy, and Nintendo 60 Jorts. This has been Phantom A, thank you for watching.